In this video, I want to talk about creating a preloader for your website. Now, as a general note, you would most likely want to avoid having a preloader on your website because the general rule and best user experience is to load the website as fast as possible. And the second that content has loaded, even just for the hero section, you want to let people see something instead of just having them to wait. That's also how Google ranks if your website is loading fast and is ranking higher by the speed that it takes to load. So in general, you don't want to create heavy website that takes a lot of time to load. However, sometimes you will work on big, cool projects like this one where you have 3D elements or heavy imagery, and it might actually take a while to load these assets, and you don't want to create a different bad experience, which is you see the hero section, but for example, you're not going to see the 3D shoe because it takes too long to load. And in that case, you might want to create a preloader just to make sure that all of the assets are loading, and when the user gets into the website, they're going to see everything the right way. Now, there is a simple way to create a preloader, and we're going to cover this right now using Webflow's native interaction. At the end, I'm going to also talk about the drawbacks of this approach and what you want to do if you want to get something a little bit more advanced and elaborate. So let's see what we're going to create here. In our design, you can see that we actually have kind of a preloader design here, and there's a few slides here to basically show us the animation that's happening as loading. So we have this, basically the outline of the logo, and in a way, it's kind of like drawing itself behind the word loading. Now, whenever you do have a loading, you do want to have some kind of an indication that something is happening. If you just put the word loading and nothing happens, the user doesn't really know if something is moving and not moving. So a lot of times, if you will create a preloader, you want to animate it just to get the feeling that something is loading. Best user experience is actually to show the numbers of, how much was loaded and how much is left. But this is, again, I'll talk about this in the end because this is a little bit more advanced and we can't do this natively right now with Webflow. So the first thing we want to have is this animation. And because there's a line here that's drawing itself, best way to do this is with a Lottie animation. Now, previously, I've showed you how I used ChatGPT to create a Lottie animation. Now I'm going to show you a different approach. So earlier, I showed you that Lottie files is really a great resource to download and find free Lottie files. But in this case, we have a custom shape here, which is the shape of the logo, which we want to animate. However, Lottie files also have a really cool product called Lottie Creator. And with Lottie Creator, I can basically import this SVG that I export from Figma and then animate it. There's basically a type of animation that you can see here. Once I've brought in an SVG layer, I can add a trim path. Trim path basically means, because an SVG is basically just a line, you can basically trim it and see and animate the position as the line draws itself. So this is basically a type of animation called trim path of a line being drawn. This is helpful to know, that this type of animation exists and how to call it if you want to look for how to do this. So this is very simple. It took me like 2 minutes to create this animation with Lottie files. And I'm going to link a tutorial if you want to learn how to do this. And from here, I can basically go ahead and export this as a JSON file, quite like the file that we've uploaded to Webflow previously. So let's go ahead and set that up. I've got the Lottie animation, and let's talk about the setup of what we're going to have here. So basically, we need to have some kind of a layer or a wrapper for this preloader that sits on top of everything else that we have here and is showed immediately as the website loads. And when the website has completed loading, it basically will animate away. So let's first set up basically the structure of this and then the animation. So in this case, I'm going to create this preloader animation outside of the main. It's not part of the main, of course. So inside of the page wrapper, I can create a new div, and we can call this div preloader wrapper. Okay, in this preloader wrapper, we know we want this to be fixed. So let's set this to fixed. And also on top of everything else, so let's set Z index of 20 and fill up the whole screen. And let's also give this a background of black. So now we've got basically a wrapper that sits on top of the rest of the website. Now, inside of it, we want to center in the center this Lottie animation. So let's create a new div, which we'll call Lottie wrapper. And inside of this Lottie wrapper, we can actually bring in the Lottie animation, which let's see if I've uploaded here. No, I have not uploaded yet. So let me go here from our project assets. We've got the Lottie and we've got the preloader JSON, which is available for you as well. And let's see this. Let's preview this animation. All right. So it's playing, but it's quite big. I can also set up how fast it happens. And I do want this to loop. So right now I'm going to use the built-in duration of 2 seconds. Of course I can. If I want to make this slower, I can set this to maybe 4 seconds and then it's slower. Maybe that's okay. And I'm going to loop it. Okay. So that is okay. And we don't want this to be so big. How big is this element here? Let's see in Figma. This is about 180 5 pixels or 186. So for Lottie wrapper, let's go ahead and set this to 186 pixels. And because we want this centered, let's take the preloader wrapper, turn it into flex and just center it so that the Lottie wrapper is here. And if I'm going to hit preview, you can see that now we have it. I actually think maybe it's a little bit too slow. Maybe bring it back to 2 seconds and preview this. Yeah. Okay. So we've got the Lottie. Now we want text on top of the Lottie that basically says loading. So inside of the Lottie wrapper, let's add a text element, text block, and let's call this loading. 1, 2, 3. And let's set it to be lime by going to the Lottie wrapper and then changing text color to lime. Now I do want it to be on top of the animation and centered, which basically means this text block will have to be, will have to be absolute positioning, right? So let's call this a loader, preloader text. Set it up to be absolute positioning. Of course, we're going to have to set the Lottie wrapper to be relative. So it's going to be its parent. Let's also set it up to fill, and then we can maybe set this to flex in the center. Okay, so now it is center. Let's preview this. Okay, so the preloader is basically set. Now what we want to do is we want to make sure that, first of all, by default, we most likely want to hide this, right? So we're going to set this to none, just so that we can continue working on our website, right? It doesn't make sense to see this all the time if we want to edit the website. So now we've got the setup and it's hidden, but what we actually want to happen is when the website loads, immediately show it, right? So let's head into interaction, and this is a page trigger. We already have some page loads animation. Let's add another one, page load. And this time, when the page starts loading, we want to create a new animation that shows the preloader. So let's create an animation called show preloader. And the only thing that this does is we select the preloader wrapper and we set the show hide to flex, because that's what it's set to, and it happens immediately. So that's it. That's now immediately happens. I can preview this by just hitting play, and now we see that immediately we have the preloader loaded, and that's great. So now we need to set up the second stage, which is when the page finishes loaded, we want to basically animate the preloader out. And of course, we can do this in whatever way we want, opacity, movement, whatever way we creatively want. Let's start an animation. Let's call this remove preloader. Now, right now, it's difficult to animate it because I can't see it. So I'm going to save this for a second. I'm going to go back and just show this temporarily, just so that we can see what we're doing with this animation. I'm going to go to page load. We're going to go to remove preloader. And now let's say we want this to slide away. So all I'm going to do is select the preloader wrapper and animate it out. Let's say 100%. And 100% is going to move it down. So let's do actually minus 100%. So it's going to move up. Let's do a duration of 1 second and something like maybe out quad. Let's preview this. Okay, maybe even 2 seconds. Not 21, 2 seconds. No, 2 seconds is way too much. Yeah, okay, so this sounds good. So the logic that we have right now is this. When the page starts loading, we're going to show the preloader. When the page finishes loading, we've got all the content, we're going to remove the preloader. And now I can go back and hide the preloader here. And of course, I can preview it here, but what would happen is it would immediately remove because we are inside of Webflow and everything is loaded as it is. So a good way to test this out would be to publish this. Now we can check this out on the browser. And this was also too quick. So let me copy this and open up an incognito browser where we haven't cached out the website before. And I'm going to load this and pay attention. We have actually 2 problems here. Number one, I don't know if you've noticed, but there was a flicker before. We could actually see the background before the preloader showed. So there was a little bit of a flicker. And then the preloader moved out of the way as if the whole website is loaded, but actually the spline scene was not fully loaded. So these are 2 separate problems that we need to tackle with. First of all, let's tackle the flicker. Now, the reason that we have this flicker is because we're basically showing the preloader here using this animation, and Webflow only loads this animation at the end, after it first loads the page and then loads the animation. And that's why we see the flicker. It loads the page and then it says, oh, we need to show the preloader, turns on the animation, and then for a second, split second, we actually see it. The only way to solve this is actually not use this when page is loaded. So I'm just going to remove this and manually add a code here to the head of the page right here. Kind of like the same thing that we did for the staggering letter. The same flicker, we want to tackle the same problem here. So I'm just going to, let's actually see what the class of the preloader is, and I'm going to copy it. So preloader wrapper, and let's go back to the code. And from here, let's set this. So I'm going to do dot and then paste this. And again, I'm not a great coder, but I can see, here how we need to write this. So basically open brackets, end brackets, and now the property that we want to change, which is display, comma, flex. So we want to make sure that it's, and then semicolon, make sure that the first thing that happens, when it loads the head code, so it's the beginning of the page, it sets this to flex so we see it immediately and there's not going to be a flicker. So I can save this and I can go ahead and publish this just to see if we solved the flickering. And then we'll talk about what to do with the spline element. So open this. And now you see, okay, so now the preloader showed up immediately and then it would removed. Now we've got the spline loaded here fast. But if this was, on a different website, here we still have this problem. Now, this is where Webflow is a little bit limited because it does know the progress of loading images on the website. So it can say, okay, all the content and images are loaded, but because we're loading this from Spline, which is another service, they're not getting the loading progress from Spline. Now, actually, Spline does send this information, and I don't know why Webflow does not, because Webflow knows we're using Spline. So I don't know why Webflow doesn't check for this loading progress, but unfortunately, they don't, and we don't have access to this. So the only thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to manually delay the load. I saw that it takes maybe 2-3 seconds to load this, and of course, we can test this on different load speeds. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to page load and remove preloader. And basically this will be triggered whenever Webflow thinks everything is loaded, but we know we need an extra 2-3 seconds. So I'm just going to set the delay here to maybe like 3 seconds. I think, okay, people are going to see the preloader for 3 seconds, even if the images are loaded already. Let's save this and let's publish this. But this is going to protect us from the case that, again, it's going to be removed and we're not going to see the shoe. And so let's open this up. Now we can see, now we know we're going to see the preloader at least 3 seconds, 1, 2, 3, and then it's going to be removed, and then the shoe is for sure going to be there. So it's kind of like a hack. It's not the perfect way to solve this, but unfortunately, Webflow does not allow us access to the loading progress of the spline. Now, one more thing that I wanted to mention, which Webflow currently does not give us access to, is the progress of the load, so that we can, because the best practice when it comes to preloader is that you show a progress bar that says, 10% loaded, 15%, because people already get, when they understand how long they have to wait, they're more willing to wait versus just seeing a loading like we've created right now. For that, I'm going to link to a custom code if you want to get access to the loading numbers instead of using Webflow's native loader information. Then you can do that with a little bit of a custom code, but unfortunately at the moment is not accessible with Webflow, perhaps in the future.